We are live, Chairman.
And thank you very much. And a very good morning to everybody. Welcome to this, the first of the two meetings of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to consider the IP and budget going forward. Thank you very much for your attendance this morning. Firstly, I may need to make a short announcement regarding COVID. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in electronic capacity, and there is a link on the Council's website for them to do so. Members of the committee are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called upon to speak, and then switch their microphones off once they've finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if the members so wish. However, if you experience connection or other technical issues, it may help to switch your camera off. Cameras should be switched on if and when speaking in the meeting. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raise hand function, and the use of the meeting or of the chat function is exclusively reserved for voting. Thank you very much for that. There have been a number of membership changes. Margaret Eames-Patterson joins the Community Safety Group. Stephen Giles Meshurst, Jada Gordon and William Wyatt Lowe will be joining the Highways and Environment Group. Public Health will be joined by Seamus Quilty, who is replacing Tina Howard on that group because she's on adult care as well. Adult care will also have Ron Tyndall, although I do believe we may have apologies from Ron, more of that later. And Gripe, where we have Stephen Giles Medhurst. Resources and Performance, Leslie Green-Smythe and Steve Jarvis. Thank you very much. Apologies. I've had formal apologies from John Sloan, who's unable to join us this morning. And I do believe, as I say, that I've heard elsewhere that maybe Ron Tyndall may not be able to join us. I remind you that all equalities, implications and equalities impact assessments undertaken in relation to any item or matter on this agenda must be rigorously considered prior to any decision being taken or reached on that matter. And members are further advised that in respect of the debate concerning the Council's integrated plan, including the setting of the council tax precept, the Standards Committee has exercised its power to grant a dispensation to all Hertfordshire County councillors from the requirement to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or a declarable interest. Accordingly, there's no requirement for any councillor to make such declaration of interest in respect of this item of business. And I would also remind you that Section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992 provides that if a member is in arrears of council tax for 2 months or more, and they are present at a meeting where the council's budget or the precept is being considered, then they should declare this, and any such member must not vote on any matter relating to the setting of the council's budget or the precept. The provisions of Section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992 apply even if there is an arrangement to pay off those arrears. So that's the formal notices out of the way. So once again, welcome. Welcome again. We've got IP Scrutiny Group Chairman, Scrutiny Support Officers, Scott Grudgington, finance colleagues, executive members and other HCC members joining in the Overview and Scrutiny Committee this morning for this IP scrutiny. The annual scrutiny of the proposed budget plan is arguably the most significant piece of work in the scrutiny calendar. And we recognise the challenges this year due to the pandemic and appreciate the way in which our members and officers come together to ensure the scrutiny can be carried out thoroughly and effectively. This morning, we shall hear from Scott Grudgington, Director of Resources, to give us an up-to-date overview of the IP proposals and budget position and allow the committee some time for questions. Before that, we will hear from our Scrutiny Officer, Fiona Corcoran, who will outline the process for today's budget scrutiny. This year, we're keen to ensure all recommendations are focused on the integrated plan rather than service delivery more generally. This focus can include consideration of the potential impact of proposals outlined in the integrated plan on Hertfordshire citizens, as this is essential to the work we do in Scrutiny. As with all the work we do, our aim is for Scrutiny to add value to the Council's budget process, and we are looking for solid recommendations that are clear, constructive, and realistic, and therefore likely to have the greatest impact. I would hope that chairmen of the IP Scrutiny groups do please keep this in mind. Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. Consideration of the minutes of the committee meeting held on the 11th of December will take place at the second meeting of this committee on the 28th of January. So all the time today can be solely focused on the work we have on the integrated plan. There are no public petitions. And at this point, I'm going to invite Fiona Corcoran, Scrutiny Officer, to just whisk us through the process for today and the 28th. Fiona.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just run through the programme briefly and outline the process for this scrutiny. So we are following a very similar process to previous years' budget scrutiny, with the main difference this year being that all the meetings involved are happening virtually this year due to the pandemic. And the process takes place over 2 days. Day one today is the evidence gathering, and day two, which is next Thursday, the 28th, is the confirmation recommendation. So when the committee has heard from the Director of Resources this morning, the committee will adjourn and members will break out into smaller separate groups to focus on individual portfolio areas. The membership of these scrutiny groups is taken from this committee along with a number of other county councillors, just excluding executive members, and representatives from Healthwatch Hertfordshire. A chairman has been appointed for each of these groups and will be responsible for ensuring that key questions are covered and any recommendations are clear and agreed with by the rest of the members of their group. These groups will have 2 hours to gather evidence from the respective executive members for that portfolio that they're focusing on, chief officers and finance officers. After that, the scrutineers will have some time within their groups to agree recommendations, and all recommendations will be reported back to me and the head of scrutiny, Natalie Rotherham, at the end of the day, so that we can include them all in the draft report. The portfolio groups that are meeting this morning are Community Safety and Waste Management, chaired by Jeff Jones, Education, Libraries and Localism, chaired by Lynn Chesterman, Highways and Environment, chaired by Richard Fake, Public Health and Prevention, chaired by Ken Crofton. And a new feature this year, there's an additional scrutiny group in the morning, which is going to focus on strategic review of the whole council budget, chaired by Paul Zakowski. All timings are outlined in the programme, which is Appendix 1 of today's meeting papers. The afternoon evidence gathering sessions will start at 2:35, and prior to that, all scrutineers will meet with their IP group chair for a pre-briefing at 1:50. The portfolio groups meeting this afternoon are Adult Care and Health, chaired by Nigel Quinton, Children, Young People and Families, chaired by Dee Hart, Growth and Infrastructure Planning and the Economy, chaired by John Hale, Resources and Performance, chaired by Stephen Bolton. The draft report will be circulated to all involved by the end of this week to allow for comment, and will be considered and debated by the Overview and Scrutiny on Thursday, the 28th of January, when this meeting reconvenes. Thursday, the 28th of January is day 2 of the budget scrutiny process. All chairs of IP scrutiny groups will attend to present their recommendations, and all executive members will also attend to provide some initial feedback on those recommendations. And that's not a full response. It's just some feedback on the recommendations themselves. At the end of this meeting, on day 2, the committee will be asked to agree the recommendations that they wish to submit to Cabinet, and whatever recommendations they agree will be put forward to Cabinet for its consideration and reported to full council. The chairman has already spoken about our intention to keep recommendations focused on the IP proposals this year, And in addition, this year, we're looking for a focus on recommendations coming out of the evidence gathering groups rather than information requests and scrutiny work proposals. But if those things arise, I'd ask the scrutiny support officer within that group to ensure they're recorded so that we can pick them up via the committee at a later point rather than within the IP scrutiny report, because we want to really keep the focus this year. And on a practical note, we always advise best to aim for a small number of solid recommendations. And if a group feels that they've thoroughly tested and robustly challenged their portfolio and are content and reassured with all responses, it is even acceptable to have no recommendations in that instance. And just finally, as David outlined, there have been a couple of changes to some of the IP group membership lists since the papers were published. But everyone should have now received all their invitations for the appropriate breakout meetings. If you have any problems with that, contact either me or Democratic Services Officer Deborah Jeffrey today, and we'll resolve any issues. Thank you. That's all from me.
Fiona, thank you. Excellent as always. Could I just add to my changes? I've just been made aware that Nigel Quinton will step up onto Community Safety and Waste Management Group in place of Ron. Thank you, Nigel. Excellent. Okay, so on the 11th of December, the Scrutiny Committee received a presentation from Scott Cruddington, and he was questioned through that. But of course, a lot has happened since then. So at this stage, I'm going to ask Scott to update us and bring us on from the beginning of December, so that we're as up to date as we can be as we go into today's business. Scott, over to you. Good morning to you.
Chairman, just before, I saw that Councillor Billing had a hand up. I don't know if you noticed. Apologies.
I didn't notice. No, indeed I didn't. Sorry. Judy, I can't. Let me just go there. I can't see your hand. Would you? Is there something I can do for you?
Yes, I wanted to ask a question, but I didn't obviously want to ask it at an inappropriate time. Would you like me to ask?
Yes, please, if it's relevant. That's perfectly acceptable.
Oh, of course it's relevant, Chair. It's never occurred to me to wonder before, when we've done this process at County Hall, whether why our scrutiny groups are not held in public. It seems strange and unusual, but I have a rather sad colleague in North Hertfordshire who would have liked to have gone to some of these this morning. And it's the first time I've noticed that these are not public meetings. And I just wondered why that was, and whether I could have a reason to transmit to not millions, but one or two people who would have liked to have sat in on them.
Yeah, that's a very fair question. It's not part of the business that we make public, but I'm sure Natalie or Fiona have a far better explanation than I. Natalie, would you like to comment on that?
I think Judy raises a really valid point, and it's something that we've been discussing in terms of when we kind of revamp the IP process, which I think we would like to consider, that we actually think about how we can make it more accessible to the public in terms of that, holding portfolios to account. Judy, I think if you've gone mute if you were wanting to say something there.
Yeah, if I could just add to that. Officers and I talk regularly and fairly constantly about the work we do and the process here in particular, and we have identified a number of areas that we feel could now be improved on the benefit of the experience that we've built up over the last several years. And one of those is potentially not going forward and doing it in quite the same way as we are doing it today. But because of the various pressures on the group, the team, myself and others, we've not been able to bring that forward in time to put any really tangible changes in place. But it is a valid point. We are aware of it. I've raised it several times. I personally would like the public to engage with scrutiny. I have been working quite extensively during my tenure to improve and raise the profile of scrutiny, and I entirely understand the concerns that have been expressed. If your colleague at North Herts would like to keep in touch with us, I think we will be coming forward with some potentially valuable changes for them in the next few months.
I'm sure he would. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I've got other hands coming up. I've got Stephen and Simon. Stephen, is it pertinent at this point? I'm sure it is.
It is indeed pertinent at this point, and I echo Judy's concern that we're going to be asking in the various groups detailed questions about what is in, and you're rightly saying this scrutiny is directed to the integrated plan, thus the budget for the next financial year and future years, yet no one's going to know that we've asked those questions because they're not allowed to listen into those meetings. Now, I'm assuming that it's possible to either record those meetings or at the very least the notes arising from those meetings in terms of those questions that are asked and the answers given, and thus the recommendations to overview and scrutiny to be made public, even though obviously at this late stage it's not possible to allow members of the public to attend. Can that be done, please?
Well, I've inquired. It's a very good point you raise, and I have inquired about the recording of these sessions under the COVID circumstances we find ourselves in, and I've been advised that it's not actually practical at this stage to do that. You're absolutely right about the questions and what have you not being available to the public, but of course the recommendations are, because they will come out in public on the 28th. Which at the moment, regrettably, is about as good as we can offer. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take a slightly different view to it. I think the way I look at what we're about to do is that we are scrutinising our work at the moment. I'm sure we are going to be transparent about all of this, but I think there's plenty of opportunity once we've scrutinised what we're doing to then be able to engage with the public to tell them the whys and wherefores. So I take the points that have been made, but I really do think this is us looking at our work to make sure that before it goes out and gets put into place, it's properly scrutinised by us.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And there will be parts in there which, frankly, those who are not engaged on a day-to-day basis will, may I suggest, find fairly heavy going, but that's no reason to hold it back. But at this stage, the way it's set up, the best we can do at this moment is to keep it as much in public as we can, and the recommendations, of course, will come out in public, can be discussed in full, can be drilled down on by members of the overview and scrutiny on the 28th. So thank you for those questions. I'm going to move on now. Could the legacy hands be taken down just to save me from any confusion further into the meeting? I'm going to pass it on over now to Scott. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. So probably after a year of dealing with almost no paper whatsoever, that probably a lot of us received this hefty tome that arrived through our door, and it's a pleasure for me today to be able to introduce our IP for scrutiny. So I'm Scott Crudgington. I'm the Director of Resources for the Council. So in essence, what that means is that I'm charged with, sort of in a legal sense, sort of responsibility on behalf of yourselves and the taxpayers for the safekeeping of public money, and make sure that we set very sort of robust budgets for the future. If I could just also introduce Stephen Pillsworth, my Assistant Director for Finance, who has been able to sort of, has been living and breathing this document for many, many months, and I'm sure will be able to help us with some questions that may either flow from this morning or later on in the process. I think it goes without saying, from my perspective, that this has probably been one of the most challenging budgets that I've had the chance to be involved in during my career in local government. And that's, with a backdrop of the pandemic and the level of uncertainty in relation to our resources that we're going to be receiving, both from a local taxation perspective and also from a government perspective, over the years to come. So it's been really difficult to be able to pin down sort of accurate forecast that we could build a sort of 4 to 5 year forecast around. However, the document that you've got before you, I'm absolutely content is robust. in the way that it is showing a balanced budget for next year. And again, we will get into some of the reasons how we've managed to get there. And I'm confident, to put it before you, to be challenged, to be pulled apart, to be amended, to be explained for you over the course of the coming sessions. And it's also rare for me to sort of congratulate SMB colleagues because I don't want my reputation as a soft CFO ever to get out there. So from my point of view, that they've been really key in sort of holding down the budget pressures that we've experienced over the last year and forecast from beyond. They've been really key to make sure that they've continued to deliver on some key savings programs whilst also responding to the pandemic. And all of that collectively coming together has allowed us to present the base budget for you for next year today. So a few slides for you to give you a bit of detail in terms of the IP pack before you. So maybe Stephen, would you mind sharing the slides? Thank you. The next slide. Right, so just give you a little bit of background and spending review just to give you an update on where since I last spoke to the committee. Next slide, please, Stephen. So when we were back here a year ago, there was a level of expectation that some quite major changes to local government finance would be taking place. We thought we would start to become clearer about how business rates were going to be treated and how much of business rates were going to be retained at a local government level and distributed within our sector rather than effectively going back to Treasury and then being redistributed from there. The fair funding review, where I think there's general acceptance across all parties that the funding models that we've been in place for many decades now are no longer fit for purpose and are in need of revising. The health and social care green paper, that again, that's been held back for a number of different reasons, but we're still to see the outcome about how we're going to have a long-term solution for addressing the challenges in relation to health and social care. And in normal times, we would be expecting a 3 to 4 year spending review. So it gives us as a sector certainty in relation to the resources that we could expect over that period. But none of that has happened. So all of that will probably be due to the issues relating to the government bandwidth to be able to address these, as well as responding to the pandemic. So that has left a lot of uncertainty in relation to our future resources. Next slide, please. So our current year in terms of addressing COVID. So you agreed a base budget. So 850 million pounds worth of net base budget would have been agreed as part of the IP process last year. And then just before we started the financial year, obviously the impact of COVID started to take hold. And we've been fortunate that government has announced £62 million worth of direct grant, unring-fenced grant for us to be able to effectively meet the costs of responding to COVID, of which in total terms has been in the region of about 130 million. We've also received income loss compensation of around 7 million, and there is also extra further ring-fenced grants that were received in relation to infection control, hospital discharge funding, and some other ring-fenced grants. So all of those brought together has left us with about a gap of about £4 million that's not been covered by external resources. So that 4 million falls on us as a council in our budget to now address in relation to the COVID pressures. But as you can see, it could have been significantly worse. Next slide, please. So as far as the spending review is concerned, so the government agreed a 1 year spending review. And to be fair, if I was ever the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I think I would have had to make the same decision. The uncertainty in relation to the economy and therefore tax yields across the economy over the coming years are so uncertain at the moment. It would be very difficult to be able to firm up public sector spend plans over the long term. So what has come about from that spending review is an extra £155 billion worth of extra expenditure pressures, so similar to the COVID grant pressures that we've seen previously, and we've already received an allocation for that for next year, and also a cover for 75% of council tax and business rate losses that we may well see because of reductions in our tax yields. The government again has confirmed that they've been able to give us a levy as a social care provider of up to 3% adult social care precept to add on top of our base council tax increase. There's been a pause in relation to public sector pay, except for those earning under £24,000. But just a note of caution for us is that although that's a strong signal that has been given by the Chancellor of the Exchequer for pay restraint, the majority of staff at the County Council are part of national terms and conditions, and therefore the bargaining that takes place by the LGA on our behalf will effectively reach a conclusion in relation to a pay award. We've put some cover within our budget for pay increases for next year, but obviously we will abide by the national terms and conditions and bargaining. And future provision for public spending. I think the issue and the thing that we need to be watchful of is that there have been some multi-year settlements for health, education and the armed forces, which amounts to 60% of government spending. So therefore, if there is going to be further constraint over the next few years in relation to public sector expenditure, it will fall on the 40% of which we are part. So we may have to take more of the burden in order to balance the country's books effectively. Next slide, please. So our budget proposals for the IP period. So some those that have been involved in this IP challenge in the past would have seen that effectively this bridge that we create each year. So what you've got on one side is effectively the pressures that we experienced, and if we did nothing at all, if we didn't increase council tax, if we didn't undertake savings programs, then effectively our budget would have had needed to increase by £55 million. But we've managed to offset that through a proposed council tax increase, through a continuation of a savings programme, and then some one-off spending we've been able to remove out of the budget. So that's how we've managed to present you with a balanced budget today. Next slide, please. So I won't go through all of these in detail, but just a couple of highlights. So across the portfolio areas, I'm sure each of your groups will get into these, but we've continued to extend care worker pay increases into disability and older people residential care. From a highways perspective, that we've established a £10 million investment in our climate change response, and £7 million worth of investment into highways measures, and also £3 million into active travel. Next slide, please. From a sustainable hearts, following our commitment, a climate change emergency commitment back in, I think it was 2019, a number of pots of funding now to drive that programme forward. And within the waste portfolio and community safety, a number of improvements in our waste facilities, and also the delivery of our integrated risk management plan. Next slide, please. And as far as children's are concerned, investment in prevention, which absolutely is critical for our long-term sort of management of children's budgets in the future. Education, £53 million worth of investment in special schools and SEND support. Okay, next slide, please. So as far as the COVID risks and how we've gone about covering them is that we are starting to see that issues are being flagged up in children's services in terms of children looked after. Within in terms of the level of workforce that's going to be necessary to be able to respond to the casework that is being anticipated as we start to exit from the pandemic, and also our Hearts Music service and the challenges that they've faced, obviously, in being able to deliver their services over the pandemic. So we've had a level of cover within our contingency for this year and next year to be able to cover that off. We've also got further cover within the budget of £21 million that we've received from government. That was our share of that 1.55 billion that I referred to earlier. And we've also got £9 million worth of contingency that's still intact from this year, that if all things being well, that we have a reasonably predictable winter, then we should be able to carry that forward into next year. And we're looking to make use of that funding by extending further adult social care provider support for 6 months. That will cost us £9 million, and be able to cover off some of the COVID impacts that we've seen on some of our major capital highways projects relating to the A120 and the 602. And then that will still leave us with £12.5 million to pick up further unknown COVID pressures next year. Next slide, please. So as far as our savings plans are concerned, and they remain a critical element of us balancing our budget, we are still in a period of needing to undertake savings. That 13.4 of them were already within our IP and effectively have needed to be delivered for next year. So they were previous commitments that we're now going to be delivering to help balance next year's budget. We've identified just shy of £3 million worth of new efficiency savings. So just for clarity, efficiency savings don't have a sort of a direct impact on frontline service delivery. We just do things differently in a way that reduces the total cost of running that service. And then we've got 0.4 million in relation to policy choices, and they're sort of issues that could have an impact on residents in relation to the proposals that are put forward. And again, they are covered within the portfolio statements. And we've needed to defer some of our savings plans, as you could expect, because there just hasn't been the bandwidth for our officers to be able to drive forward some quite complex transformation programs. Thank you, Stephen. So as far as some key highlights from the savings programs, excuse me, that we've got £4.5 million worth of savings in the children's area relating to our transformation programs for children looked after, which started back in September 2019, and in essence it's about reducing the cost of expensive placements for children outside of Hertfordshire. So it's about building that capacity in Hertfordshire for us to be able to place our children. From an adult's perspective, over £5 million worth of savings on a multi-year transformational programme to enable people to be able to live in their homes longer, and therefore, at the where it's not possible at the moment, being able to provide that suitable accommodation. From the environment, over £1 million worth of savings in relation to efficiencies in relation to waste disposal, including an example such as shredding waste at recycling centres to help reduce transport costs and emissions. And from a resources perspective, we're continuing our ongoing review of our property assets, and that has obviously taken quite significant a change in the way that we're now looking at that in the way that we undertake our work more generally, rather than the need for all the office space that we currently have. Next slide, please. So let's just turn to council tax. So as far as council tax is concerned, our referendum threshold is set for is just shy of 2%. So the government restricts the level of increase that we can make in relation to council tax. And we're looking to increase our council tax by that level. And then the adult social care precept we can raise by another 3% across the 2 years between 21-22 and 22-23. So as far as the council tax and the adult social care precept is concerned, the IP contained within its proposals is for it to increase by 2%, we'll take 2% of the 3% in 21-22 and the final 1% the year after in 22-23. So we thought that that was the best balance to sort of pick up the issues in relation to obviously the burden of council tax increases on residents when they're clearly going to be struggling in relation to probably incomes across the Hertfordshire in response to the pandemic, but also the need to make sure we can maintain the critical services for Hertfordshire's residents. Next slide, please. So as far as capital is concerned, over the IP period, there is over £1.3 billion worth of investment going into Hertfordshire, whether that be improved assets, whether it is brand new facilities or assets as a result of that programme. The issue that I need to probably draw members' attention more to is the level of borrowing that will be underpinning that. So over that period of that 1.3 billion, that over 585 million pound of that will be financed through borrowing. Next slide, please, Stephen. So as you can see in this graph here, the grey area at the top, I think, is over the next 4 years, the increase in the capital programme will add another £22 million worth of capital financing costs on our IP over the next 4 years. And as you can see, as the years progress, there is a much greater reliance on borrowing in the future, and it's something I'm particularly focusing in on over the next year to see what we can do to look at those options to see if we can try and wean ourselves off a little bit of that level of borrowing. Next slide, please. So as far as our timeline's concerned now, so here we are today, 20th of January. We've got CLG that will be considering the IP also tomorrow. Then we've got on the 31st of January is the deadline for districts to provide all details in relation to their tax base and business rates position. And then we get into the panel challenges, and then we will come forward to Cabinet and Council on the 22nd and 23rd to set the budget. Next slide, please, Stuart. Just to bring things together, I've undertaken a reserves review this year. The reason being is that I'm particularly drawn, as you know, I'm sure a number of you would have been, to some of the difficulties that some authorities have hit on over the last year. And our general fund balance at the moment is sitting at just over £31 million, which represents 3.7% of our spend. And my view of that is very low. But the reason why I'm still able to sleep at night is that we also have a range of other specified reserves, and they're in place as almost like the first line of defence to any emergency or unforeseen expenditure before you ever need to touch general fund balances. But I've taken a view that we needed to undertake a review of those reserves to reorder them somewhat to be able to increase our general fund balance to a much more sustainable level based on the risks that we face. And you know, just to be able to give some examples, you know, the difficulties that Croydon have faced over the last year, their general fund balance was higher than 3.7%. So again, real sort of signal to me that we needed to address that. So next slide, please, Stephen. So what we've done is we've created 2 new investment funds of £2 million each to support a sustainable Hertfordshire strategy and our growth and infrastructure plans. But then we've also removed funding from a number of earmarked reserves, and again they're all covered within the covering report and IP to be able to bring our general fund balance up to a much more sensible level at 6%. And I'm also satisfied that we've also put enough cover within our reserves for any unexpected costs arising from COVID over the coming years. Next slide, please, Steve. So just to finalise, to finish on 21-22, the budget and beyond, I think we can all safely conclude that we've got some tough times ahead financially within local government. So next slide, please, Stephen. So this is we call the graph of doom as far as us officers are concerned, and what it shows is the gap in relation to our IP over the coming years. So as you can see there in 21-22 that we have a balanced budget, that all of the savings that are necessary to meet our costs have been undertaken, and we come into the year with a balanced budget. But as the years progress, as you can see there, the very light blue shading shows the gap that begins to increase as the years go on. So 22-23 is looking manageable as we stand today, so with all things being equal, and I'm confident with our plans to be able to address the following year. But as we start to get into 23-24, 24-25, we've got much more work to be able to do to bring the budget back in line. And I think that we can safely conclude that the savings, the approach to savings is really starting to run dry now without impacting on frontline services. So the burden now that will be placed on maintaining or containing pressures within our budget and inflation within our budget, plus also undertaking major transformation programs that can take 18 months, 2 years to deliver, are going to be probably the key focus for us now over the next few years. Okay, I think that is me done now, Chair, and I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Well, Scott, very helpful. Thank you very much for that update, and thanks for finishing spot on time. That's really quite excellent. Well, this is the point in the programme where I now adjourn the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting and invite members of the OSC and members who have joined us for this exercise to break out and go into your particular scrutiny sessions. So that's where we are at the moment. I just look to officers to see if there's any last minute comments from them. Fiona?
Sorry, nothing from me, Chairman.
Okay, so to your portfolios, if you would.
Could I ask a question?
Of course.
Yeah, I'm sorry, because actually Scott ended with a slide saying questions. I'll put my camera on. Out of the blue, we were copied into this letter about arrivals from Hong Kong and the fact that the County Council, Hertfordshire, can expect a disproportionate number of families to come from that source. I think something like 3.5% of all arrivals from Hong Kong coming here. I just wanted a sense, is that actually quite a startling challenge, which might actually be quite a challenge for us to meet, or is it actually just so de minimis that we don't need to worry about it in terms of budgetary implications for the County Council?
It's difficult for me to be able to give any particular details of the likely cost of that, but all I would say in general terms is that if that cost can't be covered within the existing whether it be children and families base budget, then we have a contingency budget within our budget which is effectively unallocated. And I believe that's up to £13 million for next year. And what that will then be able to do, we will be able to release some of that funding to cover that pressure. So yes, we got cover within the budget for unforeseen events.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Sandy. Thank you, Scott. Okay, back to the business of the day. And I invite
Chair,
you now.
You've got a few more hands up, Chair.
I can't see them. Bear with me a second. Yeah, thanks for that, Scott. I'm having problems with that.
It's two hands. I think it's Councillor Billing and Councillor Giles Medhurst.
I can see Sharon
and Councillor Taylor. Sorry.
Yeah, apologies. I can. Yeah, bear with me. Judy, can I ask you to?
Yes, thank you, David. I just wanted to answer the out of the blue comment that Sandy made, and it's all again down to the fantastic activity, political, social, and in every other way that goes on in North Hertfordshire. That I was asked by somebody last week about the Hong Kong issue, and that's why it's being looked into, and that letter was sent out. It wasn't actually out of the blue. It was because I and people in North Herts were making nuisances of ourselves as ever.
Yes, indeed, and I'm sure a number of us have been copied in on various messages urging us to support the situation in Hong Kong, or rather the people in Hong Kong. Thank you for that. I've got Sharon. Sharon?
Thank you, Chair. My apologies for being slightly late. It was just technical difficulties as usual. I just wanted to ask Scott around the reserves position. We very recently had our audit confirmed. Scott's that this is a very big step in terms of the consolidation of reserves. That I'm sorry, Chair. I've got someone at the door. Would you take someone else, and I'll come back in a minute. Sorry.
Yes, of course. Nigel, are you able to step in there whilst Sharon attends to her visitor?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, just received an email with updated sections from the IP papers, which seems ridiculously late in the day. I don't know if you've seen that, but we've just had a.
I've not cited. No, I'm looking at you.
Two of the sections, the CSWM, which I've only just struggled to read as I've just joined the group, has now been updated, and so has Highways and Environment.
I'll happily respond to that. Yes, apologies for that. One of the challenges we have with the budget each year, the budget is produced, and then we need to effectively rework all of that to put it into portfolio format for publication and for these sessions. What we did notice, there were just 2 items in the budget that related to some of our sustainability proposals that mistakenly got put into the community safety and waste management portfolio rather than the highways environment, where that discussion will take place. So it is just 2 lines, and I'm sure at the start of that session officers there will be able to point out exactly which items have changed.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd actually just spotted those, so it stopped us wasting time during the meeting.
But it's interesting, you see, because sorry, Sharon, just a minute. It's very interesting that here we've had 3 examples in a matter of a few minutes of why it is that this particular way we run the process now is probably reaching its zenith. We need an IP process which starts earlier, is more flexible, can consider things possibly further into the future. So these are part of the this is part of the thinking that the team and I are going through at the moment. Sharon, I hope you're.
Yeah, apologies. My heating broke yesterday, and that was the heating engineer. So I've put the flags out for him, and I'm very delighted to see him. So thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask a question about the consolidation of the reserves position, which is a very big step to take. By the way, my heart sings when I hear you talking about the revision of the IP process. Did the auditors, we just had the audit report at Audit Committee, did they comment on the reserves position? Scott's indication that he feels it was low, and his comments that the general reserve was lower than Croydon's general reserve make me slightly I'm interested to think that I don't remember any comments by the auditors when we were at Audit Committee about that. So was there any comment from the auditors about us needing to revise our reserves position?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Tower. I mean, Stephen may want to cover any particular points, but my general response will be is that the reason why we wouldn't have sort of attracted any sort of negative comments from our auditors is because of the totality of our reserves. So I would say that I would always say that the specific reserves that we had in place were, as I sort of mentioned, the first line of defence against unforeseen events, and then you access the general reserve. So the auditors will have looked at that totality rather than necessarily the pots that they were allocated in. But maybe Stephen could pick that up. Thank you.
Indeed, exactly.
Could I just interject there, because my recollection is a little while ago I was cited on a recommendation from CIPFA around the level of reserves that might be appropriate, and I just wondered, adding to Sharon's concerns and that of others, have CIPFA changed their position?
No, CIPFA provide sort of guidance, but ultimately it's they leave it down to me as your Chief Finance Officer to determine the appropriate level of reserves in relation to the local context in which our budget is set in. So effectively they give some guidance, but that can't, every authority will be different, and you ultimately rely on my judgment for that. Thank you.
Indeed, both CIPFA, the Public Finance Accountancy Body, and auditors generally do not advise on specific levels. They say that is a matter for the local authority with advice from the CFO. What they do provide, particularly CIPFA, is some benchmarking information so you can see how you can compare with other councils, and that was one of the drivers behind the review. In terms of our most recent audit reports, there was very little mentioned in the reports themselves, but there were discussions we had with the auditors as part of their field work, and their challenge back to us was less around the actual level of those reserves. It was more around, had we done the sort of review in our IP process that we've now undertaken and clearly established a view and policy as to what that appropriate level should be. Again, I think they were broadly comfortable with our going concern position once we took them through, as Scott says, the totality of reserves, but they did challenge us on how recently we had reviewed that and very clearly stated, as we have done in this IP, what our approach and what we considered the appropriate level to be.
Thank you very much. Sorry to talk over you there, Sharon. I just thought it was going to build on what you'd asked, but it clearly didn't quite go that way. Apologies. I'm looking now. I can't see any other hands up. We are just a tad behind at the moment. So if I could at this stage now formally adjourn the Overview and Scrutiny meeting and invite you to go into your breakout groups. And given that we've not been able to have a comfort break at this stage, could I just remind chairman of the individual groups just to be minded that weary bones and aching joints appreciate a break every now and then as we go through the sessions. Thanks ever so much. Good luck. Happy scrutineering. Catch you the other side. Enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.